Fear of abandonment. How childhood emotional wounds shape your adult relationships. You trust, but the moment something goes wrong, you start to fear you'll be left all over again. Relationships turn into emotional roller coasters. Too much love, too much fear. But what if this panic about being abandoned has nothing to do with the present? What if it all began when you were still a child? In this video, you'll understand how childhood wounds, especially the fear of abandonment, quietly shape your adult relationship, and why you keep repeating the same patterns, even when you want things to be different. Who among us hasn't felt this way at some point? That uneasy feeling at the start of a new relationship. Your mind racing, thoughts spiraling. You feel that familiar anxiety and confusion, unsure of which way to go, wondering if past mistakes will come back to haunt you. To move forward, we need to understand what's really happening inside us. Only then can we be ready for the new path ahead. There's a hard-to-explain feeling, a wave of anxiety that hits when the other person takes too long to reply, cancels last minute, or says, "I need some space." It's like the ground vanishes beneath you, and something inside screams, "You're going to be left again." But that pain doesn't always come from the present. Fear of abandonment doesn't start in adulthood. It forms slowly, quietly, during those early years of childhood, sometimes through words spoken, other times through painful silences. Children absorb absence like wounds, even when they don't know how to name it. And they carry that pain in their bodies, in their hearts, and into future relationships. Maybe you grew up with emotionally distant parents. Maybe you felt you had to earn love. Or maybe you learned not to be a burden, not to ask for too much, not to cause problems. Over time, that effort to be accepted becomes a pattern, and patterns turn into invisible prisons. In adulthood, the fear of abandonment doesn't look like fear. It disguises itself as jealousy, control, or an endless need for validation. You feel like you love deeply, but underneath that love is a desperate attempt to shield yourself from what you fear most. Being discarded, ignored, forgotten. You begin to mold yourself to others. You say yes when you want to say no. You tolerate what you shouldn't. You accept crumbs because you fear the silence. And when the other person pulls away, even just a little, everything collapses. Your body goes into high alert, as if reliving an old trauma. Only now, that trauma is wearing the mask of the present. But here's the core truth. The pain is real. It just isn't new. And what was learned can be unlearned. That's the thread of hope. Fear of abandonment isn't a life sentence. It's an emotional response that hasn't yet been met with empathy and awareness. Have you ever wondered why you're drawn to people who are always almost there? Almost available, almost present, almost committed. That almost hurts, but it also feels familiar. Because so often, childhood love was like that too. Fragmented, unstable, uncertain. As strange as it sounds, the brain craves the familiar, not the healthy. That's why you may feel more drawn to emotionally challenging partners than to those who offer stability. And that's how the cycle repeats itself, even when you long for something different. Fear of abandonment subtly shapes your decisions. It influences how you read messages, interpret silences, respond to criticism. Sometimes, it even makes you end things before the other person has a chance to leave, just to feel like you're in control, just to avoid feeling that rejection again. But does walking away first really protect you? Or just prolong the loneliness? Maybe you never heard these words as a child. It's okay to be scared. I'm here. Maybe, instead, you learned that feelings were inconvenient, that crying was weakness, that needing others pushed them away. Growing up in that kind of environment teaches you that it's not safe to depend on anyone. And yet, the need for connection doesn't go away. It hides. It transforms. It becomes urgency, clinginess, anxiety. You may appear independent, strong, even cold on the outside, But deep down, there's still a child longing to be held, longing to be chosen, longing to be enough for someone to stay. The most surprising and painful part is that even in relationships where everything seems fine, that fear shows up. You can be with someone who truly loves you and still feel that constant worry. What if they get tired of me? What if I am too much? What if I relax and lose everything? That kind of thinking doesn't come from the present reality. It comes from an emotional past that still lives inside you. Your nervous system, trained from early on to survive abandonment, stays on high alert. It affects your sleep, your focus, your mood, and of course your ability to feel safe in love. You become an expert at predicting emotional disasters. A change in tone, a shift in routine, a glance. You read them all as signs that the end is near. Then comes the fear, the panic, the urge to do something, anything, to make sure they're still there. That might mean people-pleasing, self-abandonment, begging, or walking away before it hurts more. But there is a turning point, and it doesn't come from someone else. It comes when you realize that this fear is old, that the person you most need to make peace with isn't your current partner. It's the version of you who once felt alone, ignored, invisible. Healing begins with a gentle look at that part of yourself, with the understanding that the child who learned to stay quiet to be loved doesn't have to stay silent anymore. Today you have a voice. You have choices. And most of all, you have the chance to build relationships rooted in truth, not fear. This doesn't mean not feeling fear. It means not being controlled by it. It means noticing the fear, acknowledging it, understanding where it comes from, and still choosing to move forward, to love, even with the risk, to stay even through discomfort. Because now, you're no longer trapped in the past. You're aware. Healthy relationships require courage. Not the courage to be fearless, but the courage to stay even when fear shows up. The courage to speak up, to be seen, to stop running, to break the cycle your parents may never have been able to break. And here's a hard truth, but one that can set you free. The person who most needs to ensure you won't be abandoned is you. John Bowlby, the father of attachment theory, wrote that every human being is born with a deep primary need to be cared for. When that need is unmet in childhood, it doesn't vanish. It just takes on new forms. And it's that distorted shape that causes us to repeat painful relationship patterns. Many adults today live under the weight of what Bowlby called anxious attachment. These are people who love deeply, but live in constant fear of loss. It's like loving with the brakes on, and your heart racing at the same time. The connection feels like a tightrope. Any misstep could lead to a fall. And when they don't fall, they jump. Yes, sometimes people with abandonment fears unconsciously trigger breakups just to prove what they've always believed, that in the end, they'll be alone. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The pain of abandonment is terrifying, but also paradoxically familiar. And the familiar, even when painful, can feel like safety, in a distorted way. Philosopher Simone Weil once said, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." Maybe that's what you lacked as a child. Someone who truly paid attention to your emotions, your needs, your small aches. That absence teaches a child that they matter less than others. And that feeling of invisibility later morphs into chronic fear of abandonment. That's why you may feel like you have to earn love, as if you have to prove every day that you're worth choosing. This creates imbalanced relationships, where one gives too much and the other just takes. It's exhausting. It's unfair. And it's deeply lonely. But there is a way out. And it begins the moment you realize you're no longer that helpless child. Today, you can choose where to invest your love. You can walk away from what depletes you. You can say no without fearing abandonment. Because now, you have yourself as your foundation. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Fear of abandonment is exactly that, an unconscious shadow steering your choices, until you're brave enough to face it. Understanding this fear is the first step toward freeing yourself from it. And no, this journey isn't linear. There will be setbacks. There will be days when old patterns feel more comfortable than new awareness. But every time you choose not to give in to fear, you break a link in the chain. You slowly teach your nervous system that love can be safe. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You don't have to abandon yourself to be accepted. You just have to be whole. And wholeness begins the moment you stop expecting someone else to heal a pain that lives inside you. In the end, this isn't about avoiding abandonment. It's about learning that even if someone leaves, you won't lose yourself. Because now, finally, you're here for you. So now, I want to ask you a simple but profound question. Can you remember the first time you felt left behind? It didn't have to be physical abandonment. Sometimes all it took was a not now, a distracted look, a broken promise. And in that moment, something in you decided, I'm not a priority. That moment stuck. It imprinted. And chances are, it's still echoing in your relationships today. Take a moment to reflect. How often do you feel like you need to do more than necessary just to be accepted? Have you ever felt that if you let your guard down, the other person will leave? That if you show your needs, you'll be seen as weak, needy, or too much? These feelings don't come out of nowhere. And most men in your generation, especially between 25 and 40, were taught early on to bury these emotions in a dark corner, to grow up quiet, to swallow pain, to be strong enough not to admit when it hurts. But let me tell you something you may have never heard before. You have the right to feel fear. You have the right to have been wounded. And most of all, you have the right to heal. So, here's an invitation. Look inward with honesty. Do you live in fear that someone might leave? Or in fear that if they stay, you'll have to show them all of you, scars and all? Because sometimes, fear of abandonment masks another fear, the fear of truly being seen. Because if someone sees all of you, will they still love you? And here's something curious. The more you run from abandonment, the more it chases you. Why? Because you're not running from people. You're running from parts of yourself that still need love. When you avoid facing that pain, it keeps repeating, cycling back, trying to show you what's still unresolved. So let me ask again. Do you know the difference between needing someone and choosing to be with them? Fear of abandonment blurs that line. It makes you confuse love with need. It makes you tolerate what you shouldn't, accept what's unfair, and stay where all that exists is absence. But what if, starting now, you began to build a solid presence within yourself? What if, instead of holding tightly to someone else, you began to hold yourself up? This isn't about becoming some unreachable emotional fortress. It's about developing what psychology calls secure attachment. People with secure attachment don't live in fear of being left. They don't have to abandon themselves to feel love. They know that real connection doesn't require performance. Only presence, reciprocity, and authenticity. Would you allow yourself to feel that? Can you imagine a relationship where you don't have to prove anything, just be? Of course, that takes work. It takes relearning. Because for many years, maybe you believed that love had to hurt. That loving meant self-sacrifice. That relationships were a battlefield. And more than once, you blamed yourself for the failure of something that was never really in your control. But now, things are different. Because now, you're aware. And awareness is the beginning of freedom. Take a moment to reflect on 3 important relationships in your life: romantic, familial, or even friendships. Now ask yourself, in any of them, did you reshape yourself just to avoid being left? Did you silence something important out of fear of losing the connection? Did you diminish who you are just to keep the bond? These questions aren't meant to place blame. They're here to show you how deeply this emotional pattern may have infiltrated your closest connections. Because when fear of abandonment goes unrecognized, it contaminates everything. It alters how you love and how you allow yourself to be loved. So now, I invite you to pause. Take a deep breath. Close your eyes for a moment and remember the child you once were. The child who felt scared, who may have been left alone, who saw and heard things no child should ever face. Now, picture yourself kneeling in front of that child, looking them in the eyes, and saying with quiet strength, "I'm here now, and I won't leave you." That's the foundation of it all. When you commit to yourself, you stop demanding from others a presence they may never be able to give. You start choosing differently, attracting differently, living differently. And here's a simple, but powerful, exercise to take with you. For 1 week, every time you feel fear of being rejected, abandoned, or forgotten, stop, breathe, and ask, is this pain from now, or is it old? Then say to yourself, out loud or in your mind, I belong to me. I will not abandon myself. Do this with honesty, not as a technique, but as a real act of care. Over time, you'll realize that while this fear runs deep, it's not invincible. It just wants to be heard, seen, integrated. You're not alone in this journey. Many men live with this same dilemma, in silence, carrying the burden of appearing strong while crumbling inside. But real strength is allowing yourself to feel, to ask for help, to admit there are wounds, and to know they can heal. So let me ask you, what have you been doing with your pain? Do you bury it, hoping it disappears? Or do you allow yourself to face it, scared of what you might find? Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote, life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forward. Maybe now is the time to look back with compassion, so you can move forward with freedom. If you've made it this far, it's because some part of you is ready to break the cycle, and that's something to honor. Because breaking family patterns, especially around abandonment, is one of the bravest things a human being can do. It means saying, I deserve more. I don't have to repeat the pain that was passed on to me. So I invite you, with respect and humanity, to keep going. Seek support if you need it. Talk to someone you trust. Look for books, therapy, groups, or spaces where you can be received without masks. Because yes, there are places where you can be whole, where you don't have to be on guard all the time, where love isn't a risk, it's a home. And before we close, I want to ask you one final thing. If you weren't afraid of being left, what would you do differently today? Who would you be? Who would you be with? What would you stop tolerating? What would you finally begin to live? These answers don't need to come right away, but they will come. And when they do, you'll realize something. That all along, there was something stronger than your fear inside you. Your desire to be real, and your right to be loved, exactly as you are. Throughout this video, we've explored a topic rarely discussed with the depth it deserves. How fear of abandonment, formed in childhood, quietly shapes your adult relationship. We've seen that this fear doesn't come from the present, but from old emotional imprints, silent wounds caused by emotional absence, unstable bonds, or impossible expectations. We've learned that this fear often hides behind jealousy, control, or anxiety, but its origin is a child's desperate and legitimate attempt to survive emotional neglect. We recalled Bowlby's attachment theory, which shows how early relationships shape our ability to trust and connect. We echoed Jung's wisdom, that what we don't make conscious will rule our lives. We honored the insight of Simone Weil and Kierkegaard, who remind us of the power of attention and reflection. We discussed anxious attachment, a well-documented psychological category, and how it leads to toxic relationship patterns, not by choice but by familiarity. As Amir Levine and Rachel Heller explain in Attached, the new science of adult attachment, People with this attachment style constantly scan for signs of rejection, which erodes their relationships. What could be light and safe becomes an emotional battlefield. We also highlighted recent Harvard research on human development, which found that the quality of emotional bonds in childhood impacts adult well-being more than income or success. The longest-running study on human happiness, Harvard Study of Adult Development, concluded that secure, meaningful relationships are the strongest predictor of lifelong well-being. And we mentioned the work of Dr. Gabor Maté, author of When the Body Says No, who links early trauma and emotional repression to physical illness. He writes, "We were not meant to live disconnected from our feelings, let alone deny the pain we've carried since childhood." All of this points to one truth. Healing fear of abandonment isn't about erasing the past, it's about integrating it with awareness. It's looking at your story and saying, "This happened, it shaped me, but it doesn't define who I choose to be from here on." Let me repeat. The goal isn't to never feel fear. It's to stop letting fear run your life. When you commit to yourself, when you learn to anchor your own emotional presence, something shifts. You begin attracting healthier relationships. You set boundaries without guilt. You walk away from what drains you. And most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself. If this message truly resonated with you, subscribe. This is just the beginning of your emotional breakthrough.